I really do believe that curiosity and empathy are the two things we need to save humanity. Just those two things alone. So getting curious about our fears, about our pains, or anything else. And then stepping into empathy, like removing yourself from the center of the universe, is a game changer, right? Especially for evangelicals. We're really good at making things about ourselves, right? And we're going to be the saviors of humanity. We're still at the center of the universe, right? Empathy is such a beautiful way of putting other people's stories before your own story, right? You recognize their story. Empathy invites you into someone else's lived experience. And it doesn't mean you have to agree with that lived experience, but you have to at least admit their lived experience is valid. It has been validated because they've experienced it, right? I don't have to agree with it, but I do have to recognize that it's a thing. And I find that if more of us stepped into empathy with each other, with other, not just the people that we go to the same church with, but people like our neighbor, right? Who doesn't go to the same church as me, who doesn't have the same belief systems. Instead of me putting myself at the center of the world, what if I put them at the center of the world? Right. How would that change the way that I show up in their life? How would I change? It would be huge, right? Oftentimes the way that I'm behaving and the things that I choose to do are because I am at the center of all of it. The minute I put someone else at the center, everything shifts.
Welcome, Dr. Drew. It's a pleasure to have you here, man.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Yeah. I'm going to let you kind of introduce yourself, tell people what you do, and then I'll kind of give the backstory of, how I found out about you, and then we can just jump in. How's that sound?
Sure. That sounds great. So my name is Dr. Drew Smith. I earned my Ph.D. in depth psychology right pre-COVID, just right around there. I teach at a small business school here in Southeast Michigan. I'm in the management department there, and in my day-to-day, so my education is in depth psychology. My vocation is in management, and somehow in between those things are crossing over. So that's kind of where I'm finding myself, is at the hatch mark of humanistic psychology and the business world, which isn't really where I intended to go, but that's where I'm at. So, so by day I get to teach business classes. By night or on the weekends, I get to teach humanistic psychology classes, and then live life in between all of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you were my professor, and we had some great conversations during that semester, and I just thought it might be worth kind of jumping into a few of those questions. I remember we talked a lot about religion and breaking free from fear, and and Hillman, talked a lot about Hillman, and so I just thought those things might be fun to kind of jump into, and start there. So I remember when we first talked, I think the thing that stood out to me the most was we were talking. I don't remember exactly what I don't remember exactly what brought it up, but we were talking about how we both kind of got into curiosity of transpersonal psychology.
Yeah.
And I remember you were telling me you, like myself, have a background in evangelical culture. And that was a kind of a barrier to explore some of these concepts with you at first. And I think it's really interesting because it was like you talked about a lot of fear that you had. And I thought you'd be a really fun person to talk to because now you're teaching transpersonal psychology. So that's a big jump to go from that world of the evangelical, fear-based, your experience at least.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
Full-on teaching and full-on just embracing it. So yeah, if you would share a little bit about that journey into maybe not the whole story, but even the beginning of like what the curiosity was and then the fear.
Sure. So yeah, my history, I grew up evangelical. We were in a non-denominational church. But fear was definitely a mainstay. There was a thread kind of woven throughout growing up, just fear of God, seeing what you're doing. And, everything it was not very relational. It was very transactional with the divine, right? And it was very much also based in fear. You want to make sure you're doing the right thing, not because it's the right thing to do, but because, otherwise you could go to hell, right? Lose your salvation. This idea of punishment and hell was really ground into me at a young age, not by anyone's fault, like they didn't do it on purpose. That's just kind of how they grew up as well. So it's this just perpetuation of fear, I guess, or fear-based teaching. As I got into college, I went to a Christian college. And while I was in college, even, I was coming up against people who had different backgrounds than me and different experiences than me. So they were, even as we were sharing and talking about our lived experiences, I'm recognizing that what they had and what I had, they kind of don't jive. Yet I know their hearts and I know my hearts, and their hearts aren't far off from where my hearts are. So like something's going on over here that I hadn't really noticed before, that I never really opened the door to. So that kind of, and it was people who went to a different church, right? Different denomination. And growing up, I always thought that we were the only ones, right? We were the only ones with the truth. So they kind of cracked the door on other denominations, other ways of thinking. So that was back in, my undergrad program. And it really got me thinking about how we show up in the world and how the divine shows up, how God shows up. I've always been a little more leaning towards the mystical side, even of Christianity. Like I like the mystery of it. Um, so when all of these things started happening in my life, they were coming up against me. The traditional values that I had, or traditional beliefs that I had, when things started coming up against that, rather than running away or digging my feet into the sand more, I had to open the door and say, okay, why? What's the conflict, and why is it here? The minute I got curious about it, I was able to remove my ego from it. Right? You get curious, you start getting inquisitive, and that takes away the the offense that we often get. So fast forward then into my grad program, which I'm dealing, we're dipping in our toes into spirituality across all different beliefs, and through history, world religion's a big part of the degree program that I studied, and myth and story and how all of these weave together. And through that process, I had to step in to my program and say, if my faith is strong enough to get me to where I'm at today, then me challenging that faith had also better be strong enough to withstand being uncomfortable, right? So this
Mm,
idea of fear as a warning sign kept coming up, and I kept saying, why am I afraid? What is there to be afraid of? If I really do believe what I believe, and I did, then why am I afraid of other opinions? Because someone else's opinion isn't, it has no effect on me. There's no there's no consequence to someone else having an opinion that's different than me. It's just their opinion. I lost this need to be right, or the need to be sure. And I stepped more into curiosity and empathy and understanding someone else's lived experience, which helped me to understand how they got to where they are, right? Which is why they don't have the same belief structure that I did, why they do have, a different life lived experience. So to me, that actually strengthened my relationship with God. It strengthened my spiritual walk with God. I actually saw God more bigger, or he became bigger than he ever was through this opening up to uh to looking at fear and say, okay, if I'm afraid of you, I'm going to investigate the fear and find out why.
yeah.
It opened it up.
It's interesting. I was thinking about this the other day. Um, I remember a time where I was in India actually, and I went with a group of people, in um, predominantly Christian group of individuals, and we went to this temple, and there was one of the ladies there went into the temple and came out in like a panic, and she was like, oh my gosh, there was just so much darkness, and I remember finding it a little bit odd, where I was like, it's interesting because I was like, maybe there is an uncomfortable experience that she was having, and maybe there is an unfamiliarity to it. But I remember thinking about the amount of fear and that feeling of like I'm around something really bad, you know, and I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, okay, if the fundamental belief of Christianity, or I mean any religion in the sense is like that connection with God, or you know, like Hindu, the Atman, you know, the God, the
Right.
self, that connection to the God inside of you, that is God of the universe, however you want to define it.
Right.
I just think it's interesting where it's like, if you have that connection, what is it that would cause you to have such a fear when you're going into those places? Because I would think logically, it's like, if I have that and I feel connected to that, then what would I have to worry? Like, what would the panic be? And
Right.
I know a lot of people would say, "Oh, discernment of, you know, being not wanting," and I can understand not wanting to be in certain places, or feeling like, okay, this is a place where I probably should remove myself, or a person maybe I should like an energy I might want to stay away from. But I think what was interesting to me was the fear that was attached to it, where it was like this heaviness of like, it was no longer her saying, oh, I think I'll, instead of going here, I'll go here. It was, oh my gosh, that was so dark, that was so bad, to the point that it was affecting her. And I've just always, that's something that's always like, I've thought about that a lot. And I think I remember you saying something similar. You went to some type
Yeah.
of event where you started to feel something, and then you had a moment where you were like, I don't remember exactly how you shared it, but I
Yeah.
think that was an interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. That's the same thing happened when the program that I was a part of. We spent our fall and our winter residentials in New York, and then the spring and summer we were out in California. So I was getting all sorts of cultural differences in my program, plus meeting people from all walks of life. And I remember we went to New York, and the room where we were holding our residential for the program. It was called the Open Center, and while in there, it was a community building, and they had space for all sorts of community gatherings, and there was a bookstore that had every kind of book, every kind of metaphysical, supernatural, mystical, like Christianity, from Eastern, Western religions, all of it, and incense is going in the air, and there's all these statues and prayer flags all over the place. And I remember walking in at that time and getting really freaked out, being like, "Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Someone's going to see me in here." And I had that moment of clarity, like, who cares? What does it matter? Right?
Yeah,
There is a moment where the fear, I had to say, this fear is not rational. It's not a rational fear. It's a very existential fear. And
yeah,
if it's existential, then why am I holding on to it? I don't need to have this. I'm going to live right now in the moment. I know that everything in my life has brought me up to this. Like, I felt confident joining the program, getting the degree. This is what I always knew that I was meant to do. So if I did trust God, trust divinity, trust the universe to take me where I need to go, when I need to get there, then the moment I find myself in an uncomfortable situation, I have to know that I'm okay because I
yeah,
was brought there, right? It's not
right.
something that I chose to go into willy nilly. It's like, this is a part of the design that I know God has for my life and for my
Was
future.
stretching.
And this is,
Yeah,
yeah, it's what I want. So why am I afraid? That's me not trusting the providence of God, right? Even though I'm surrounded by everything that I've been taught to fear and to, think was of the devil or whatever you want to call it.
right.
Um, I had to recognize, well, which is going to win out? Is it the fear or is it the trust? I had to go on the side of trust. And
If you
that
could,
instantly made the whole difference.
yeah. I'm curious if you could describe. I'm wondering, do you think the fear was more horizontal or vertical? Like, meaning, was it an ontological base of like God is going to be mad, or was it I'm fearful of how this will be perceived? I'm sensing it was a little bit of both, but I'm
Yeah.
curious if you could describe it, if like that
Yeah, I
makes
would say
sense.
it's a little bit of both. Yeah. Growing up, yeah, I was always told, you have to be a good witness for the Lord. Be the smiling, happy Christian kid everywhere you go, and don't let anyone see you screw up, because then you could make them, trip and fall and lose their salvation or whatever. It's a lot of pressure to put on, especially a kid a 7-year-old,
Yeah.
8-year-old
Yeah.
trying to navigate religion. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, for sure it was, what kind of an example am I setting that was there? However, I'm recognizing that my example means more coming out of my heart rather than out of my actions. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
me just being in a room didn't do anything, but me being in a room and treating people with kindness or treating people with love or respect, regardless if I believed in the views of the people that are in that room, me attending to the God in every other person, right? Me showing up as I know God wants me to show up, that is me bringing God to the situation. So why am I afraid? There's no fear
Yeah.
there, right?
Yeah. It's a good, I mean, I think about this is a conversation I get in a lot with people. Like this propositional tyranny that is currently happening amongst faith or amongst evangelicalism, where it's not really about the death and resurrection in you. Like, what is that doing in you? How is that showing up? What are you dying to and what are you resurrecting to? Of like, phenomenologically, how is that Christ present? It's more or less how are you propositionally aligned to the belief systems and the words and what you're saying. And when I hear you say this, I think it just reminds me so much of how much easier it is, the inner aliveness. And I think that's, one of the things I love about Jung is he talks a lot about this too, where it's like he never denied any reality of the resurrection of a literal Christ. He didn't find that of the ultimate value when it comes to these types of conversations, because at the end of the day, this is a conversation I had with a guy the other day. It's like, I can't prove that anything in the past. You can't prove anything in the past. We can look at evidence and apologetics, and sure, like you can make a case and say, I believe very strongly because of this, this, and this. But at the end of the day, when you lay your head down, it's just you. It's just
Right.
you and your phenomenological experience as to what you're embodying. What is the life you're living? And so I think if that's the case, then for me, naturally the focus must shift on a lived, embodied experience. And I find that that's a really hard step, especially in fundamentalism, to take, of looking, you mentioned the ego. It's like, to me, a belief system is something the ego can obtain.
Yeah.
Um, but an embodied experience of Christ is not something the ego can ever really obtain. It
Right.
has to die to. It has to surrender into that process.
It does. It requires transformation, right? And the ego doesn't like to transform. We like to be pretty solid in our egos, but I would argue, the whole process of Christianity is very alchemical. The whole thing is about trying to take what was ripped apart and bring it back together, right? It's a return to unity, towards wholeness. The Yeah, I mean, so anything that we are doing from day to day in our Christian lives, in our evangelical lives, if it is sowing division, if it's sowing something that's going to split people apart, I don't think that's where we need to be focusing our efforts, right? I mean, we should be ones towards unity. That was the prayer of Christ on the cross, right? They don't know what they're doing. Let them all be one, right? Bring us all together. Bring us into unity. That we've got the trees in the garden, right? We've got the two trees. We start with the tree of life, which is unity, and then you've got the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is this split, this schism that takes place where everything is, you're either in or you're out, right? It's yes or
Yeah,
no. You're a sinner or you're not a sinner. You're saved or not saved. Whatever the dichotomy is, that tree of life is the thing that brings it all back together, right? That's what we're left
yeah,
in. We start out with that, we end with that in Revelation. Like, to me, that's the beauty of where we can go if we allow ourselves to be transformed. We no longer are fighting for the right, or whatever the right is. It's no longer a fight. It's more of becoming a presence in the world to try and better the world, right? What is wrong with that? That's great, but it's a shift. It's a shift, one that's from fear based to one that's more, heart based, relational based, humanistically based.
yeah.
And
Well,
two modes of going down the same road, though.
yeah. I've got two things, and I hope I can hold both of them. That was good, and because the question that I think about when I hear that, though, especially with someone that's a fan of Hillman, I think you might know where I'm going with this. But I think that there's a large amount of people in the world that are, let's take Christian nationalism, for example.
Yeah.
I would argue that no one becomes a Christian nationalism without this idea. I don't say no one. Most people probably don't fall into that category without a fundamental belief that they're doing something good or pushing towards. I don't know if I would say that they would classify it as unity, as oneness, as uh, homogeneity type mindset.
Mhm.
Uh, but I'm not sure, because I think you can. I mean, you feel the energy of that, and you feel the consequences of that, and it's almost like this flattening of not necessarily oneness, but sameness.
Right.
If we can make everything look the same, and everybody believe the same, and everybody be on the same moral framework and ethical framework that I prescribe to through literalism, or through this
Right.
this text, or through not even that, but whatever my denomination, because there's a lot of stuff that gets added to that.
Yeah.
How do you parse that out, right? Like, and how does that become something that is not a that's it's like stolen language almost, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can say it, but then it's the other person saying kind of the same thing. So now we're left with this a little bit of a dilemma.
Yeah. Well, hey, you did bring up a point. There is a difference between sameness and oneness. There's a difference between sameness and oneness, right? 'Cause you can all be the same, and it is flat, but being one is very different than being the same. Like my family and I, we are one, but we are not the same people, right? I mean, there is so much beauty in the diversity that we have within our family that we can accentuate it and grow it. I think the trap that we tend to fall into is that we're looking for sameness, and if you're not the same, then you're not in, right? Or if you're not the same, you have to be the same. You have to think the same. You have to do the same, believe the same in order to fit into our box. And that's why I don't think Jung ever dipped into that. He was very much, and Hillman as well, very much proponents of the diversity of it all, right? With Hillman, to jump to him, he
Yeah.
considered him a polytheist, right?
Yeah.
Which when I read that, there was a part of my heart that was like, "Oh my God, stay away from that polytheism. We can't have no other gods before me." And then I had to break down the word and just to recognize what it was that he was saying. When I became curious, when I started to define my terms a little bit more, right? That's when I was actually able to say, oh, this is how I live. I live a polytheistic life because I often see myself as God. And I often put, how am I looking at the world through my lens in every situation? It's usually through my own perspective, right? I mean, I am putting myself in the moment in that driver's seat, which is a little bit of a polytheistic approach to life. We're saying, okay, in this moment, this is the energy that I'm bringing into the situation. This is how I'm going to show up. That's me determining what kind of a mini God I want to be in the moment, right? Um, I can choose to be one that brings my ego. I can choose to be one that brings, a Zeus type energy. I can bring a Christ-like energy, right? The we look at Hillman and all of the words that he used to help explain these phenomena. To me, I got hung up on the idea that there are all these other, gods, like the pantheon that we look at in Greek mythology. Hillman laid heavily into those stories and those themes because they're so archetypal, right? I mean, Jung did the
Yeah.
same. But to me, here is where I justified all of it in my brain. And we can call it justifying because it's what clicked in my brain for me. It helped me to move forward. Um, if I believe the God that I serve is the God of the universe, right? And I'm not defining that. I'm just saying the one that I have in my mind's eye, in the one that I believe is the maker and creator of all, how it all of time began.
Yeah.
If I believe that that God put into motion this earth and everything in it and has it under control, then even the idea of polytheism shouldn't freak me out, because that's still within the umbrella of God, right? It's all
Right.
in there. Um, and this is the thing that I keep going back to with I'm kind of in a Genesis Revelation era in my life, where I'm looking at the beginning and the end, right? Alpha Omega time, looking through the lens of these trees, because I think this tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the thing that gets me into that fear-based living or fear-based perspective, right? Where I'm seeing things either right or wrong, right? It's
Yeah.
either or dichotomy. But recognizing that even with the tree of life, the tree of life is a tree of unity, right? That is the one that brings us all back together into the garden, where the leaves are for the healings of the nation, right? We look at Revelation. That's where we're headed. That's where we're going, according to our mythology, right? Our cosmology. Knowing though that if we can get rid of that either or mentality, then suddenly I can realize that I can hold the tension between being a polytheist, believing that I have all of these different identities, these different energies that are working within my body based on how I'm created and how God ordained me, right? These stories that have been handed down through years, those are a part of my life. I don't have to fear that, because that's still under the umbrella of that monotheistic God for me, right?
Right.
So I,
Right.
I sometimes consider myself a polytheistic monotheist, right?
Yeah.
There are these movements that I can hold the tension now, because I'm not stuck in this either or mentality. I can hold the tension where two opposing viewpoints can be equally the same for me, which
Yeah.
has opened up the door to not having fear about God, about where my soul is going when, if I'm going to do something wrong. I mean, suddenly I'm no longer saying, is this the right decision? Now I'm following the heart that God has given me. And the fear, since it's gone, it's allowed me to be more of how I expect God would represent himself in the world. I'm allowed to be that as well. It's
Right.
freed me up to do that more.
Yeah, no, it's I can't remember when, but I was reading some of the work of Pseudo Dionysius that talks about that the ineffability of God, where it was like, and a lot of the ancient or a lot of the church fathers talked about. I mean, it was a very different type of Christianity than
Yeah.
what we see today,
Right.
and especially the mystics. They're always talking about the ways of talking about God in ways of the things we can't say, right? The ways we can't describe God. And I've always thought, and I think, you'd probably agree, it's like, if we can define God, I'm going to guess our God's too small. It's like, just logically, like if we ever feel like we've got the entirety of an understanding, then it seems like that's a pretty it's a little uh, subtle trick of the ego of like, okay, here's where we
Very
can
arrogant,
orient,
right? Very arrogant.
but it is a way of orienting and framing. And I've seen multiple people, it's a way of being in the world and managing the turbulence and the chaos and all of the
Yep.
craziness that we see, the calamities that are happening, within a way that allows certain people that stability, to at least create that feeling of like, well, I know it's gonna, this is God, this is what he says, whatever. Um, Whereas when we let go of the I guess the roof of God, right, where it's like he becomes bigger,
Right.
it starts to open up all sorts of questions and curiosities, where it's like, okay, well, if we can't fully define God, and we have to think, and one of the things I always think about too is just the amount of different cultures in the world today. Um, and you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, as a child, having that tension and that pressure of being Christ and bringing the word of God to people, and essentially being responsible for people's salvations. And
Right.
I think about the billions of people on earth today that grew up in different cultures that have no idea of what the fundamental evangelical doctrine is. And yet it's their responsibility to present that to the whole world. And it just is like, I think it starts to break down. And if you're truly open to asking those questions, people, you start to feel that. And even if you're not open, I think you still feel that. And so my point just being, it's like when I think about the monotheistic, polytheistic conversation, when you're stuck in that small framework, that is a very polemical thought, because it challenges the core. It challenges the essence of everything that you've created safety around,
Right. Your reality. Yeah, for
your
sure.
reality. And so there's a need to fight. There's a need to have your God fight the other gods, or to prove your God is better than the other gods. But I've always thought, if I'm stuck in that thing of like proving my God is fighting, then I'm still participating in that.
Your belief, yeah, your God is too small. If you have to
Yeah,
fight for your God is too small.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, right. And so I think that even in itself, it's like there's all sorts of performative contradictions that start to
Right.
play out the more questions you ask. And I love, even if you study Hinduism, what you start realizing is like Hinduism is not a polytheistic religion. They have many gods, but it all comes from source. And they'll say that, like when you get
Right.
when you get into the Vedas or the tantric teachings or whatever, you start to realize they have an understanding that God is so big that to try to like worship God is almost like worshiping the blank. It's like,
Right.
yeah, we do that. But when it comes to a lived reality and the textures of life, the nuances, the different types of experiences that we have, that needs to be embodied by these archetypes. That needs to be
Mhm.
embodied by or represented, I should say,
Right.
and symbolism. It's like with your kids, you don't say, "Well, you're all my kids." Like, no, you engage with them in a dynamic way
Right.
that is unique
Definitely.
and individualistic to each one of them. Yes, they are all your kids, but they're not the same, right?
Right. Right.
So I think about that with the gods, and then how that plays out. And I think this could transfer over into the psychological component. It's like when we start viewing the gods as representations of realities that we see internally and externally and internally, now we start to see the archetypal dynamics
Right. You see the
of how
patterns
that's
start to emerge.
we see the
Yes.
patterns and the benefits of, like, I know worshiping is a very triggering words for a lot of but the sadhana, the ritual, the embodiment, the meditation of
Right.
a certain type of archetype or god, and what that does to our psyches, right? Like, as kids, it's like when you play superheroes, like, what do? You don't say, "Oh, I'm Batman." No, you embody
Right.
who Batman, like, you put yourself in that position to see as though Batman would see, or to feel as though they would feel, and that brings in a lot of those qualities.
Mhm. It's that identity, right? You're embodying an identity. um, so growing up in a conservative Christian household, when I think of my identity, we often hear, you're a sinner saved by grace, right? Okay, that's great, but I'm still a sinner, right? Even though I'm saved by grace, I'm still this sinner. And to me, that, yes, I understand what scripture says, right? I understand what we've been called, and I understand that Christ did the whole work on the cross to redeem us. But we often forget that little part in the middle of the story there where there is redemption now, and we are a new creation because our language still reflects the old creation, right? I'm just a sinner saved by grace. That's not what happened in scripture. Now it's suddenly something is transformed, something is new, right? There is that alchemical change. Yet we still talk verbally as if we were still back before there was any salvation that took place, right? That we are all, sinners in the hand of an angry God, right? We need to be in that fearful state. But I'm recognizing now that I'm living when I remove fear from this identity of God, and I'm not talking fear like fear, awe, and trembling. I'm talking fear like punishment, right? Um, when I remove that fear of punishment of being rejected by God, suddenly it's much more open, right? I'm comfortable with who I am because this is who God made me to be, and I'm able to see that. And it's not that I don't have more room to grow or someone else to, more things to grow into. It's not that at all. But it's more along the lines of now I have permission to be who I am right now without striving for anything extra, right? And then I learn and I reflect and I grow, and there's this personal desire that I have for growth, not something that's external, like my church is telling me to grow, or the pastor on Sunday morning said, "Oh, you got to do this 3 points of my sermon, practice it this week." It's not about that at all. It becomes now
Right.
I'm living out of the essence of who I am and who I was made to be. And when I have that shift in my mentality, suddenly I'm not afraid of my day to day. I embody that now. I'm more willing to step into it because I know that I'm made for today with the gifts that I need to survive today and to bring God to this earth right now.
Yeah.
Um, which is it's a new way of looking at it. It's a revived way where my identity now is wrapped up in God rather than in my own actions.
Yeah, it makes me think of the spirit and soul, that combination of having the
Mm,
connection to, when I think of spirit, I think of this vertical transcendent function in which we connect to strong transcendence, and then the horizontal being in a way soul, right? Because
yeah,
soul, and I think this fits into that polytheistic idea, because if we think of soul as polytheistic, or we think of soul of having many qualities and textures and tentacles out like the tree, like going into
yeah,
the earth, like spreading out its roots, that spirit, and this is a lot of the tantric practices, right? Like this is
yep,
idea of the weaving, of
yeah,
embodying God, embodying the gods, embodying that source, that spirit. And when we see that connection, when we see both of those happening, it's like you're able to see the richness of life.
right,
If you're totally focused on transcendence, and this earth is a test, so to say, to
right,
pass and get out, well
yeah,
then now where is the soul? The soul's gone. The soul's
right,
dead. The soul is turned into something that is just dirty and wicked, and not something that is worth
exactly,
anything.
yep,
But like again, performatively, that's a contradiction, because I think I've and I spent time in, when I was part of the church, it was like I remember sitting around in circles, and it was like there's such an emphasis put on salvation and put on
right,
saving souls and people going to heaven and all of this eternal
mhm,
language that was essentially a uniform spirituality of how to get out in a way.
right, yeah,
But there was such a disconnect, because it was like, well, we're still living. Like, and I just remember thinking to myself, like, if everybody was to get saved tomorrow, what would we do? Is
right,
it over? Like, it's like,
yeah,
okay, well then now it's sin management and just holding on, I guess, and trying not to sin until God comes back. And I think that's where we're at with a lot of
yeah,
people. It's like you almost give, it's like there's a strong tendency of saying, it's like, well, we accept that this is broken and fallen and bad and not something that is our eternal home. So we compartmentalize that section into something that is of lesser value.
right,
And then we put this greater value on a place we've never even been, that we don't know
right,
anything about. And
right,
I think that's, to me, it's just odd, because it's like, if I'm going to be here, and people live that way, they go to church and then they go home and they enjoy football and they're like, well, this is great. It's like, well, you obviously enjoy things of life, and there's obviously a reason you're here. So what do those look like when they come together in the language, right? Because
yeah,
right now I think they're naturally, it's like we're forced to live that way. Like, no one spiritual, unless you're a monk that's living in the Himalayas, that just has totally
yeah,
disconnected. You're forced to live that way, but it seems we don't have like our language has not caught up. Oh, I don't want to say not caught up. How would I say it? Our language has not been developed. It's almost been
right,
stolen. This Cartesian,
mhm.
Lutheran, it's stolen from us. And then it
It's
was made demonic. And then there's all sorts of layers on that. But
yeah,
that's where I see us at now, or I see society.
yeah. It's as if when Luther came in, right, when we had the whole Protestant Reformation, all of that, everything, kind of kind of went downhill for a bit, where we lost the mystery, we lost the beauty, the majesty of God, and now it became all about works, and it became about, don't mess up, don't screw up, right? So suddenly the soul, the thing that I love, even about now, going over, looking at the Roman Church, and I was in New York this a couple weekends ago, and went to, I think it was one of the churches that was down there, and I just walked into this incredible, like, cathedral ceiling, and the window, and it was massively, it was just overwhelmingly beautiful and hauntingly beautiful, right? And it
Mm,
made me have an appreciation for the divine, but I also recognized it was right here in the middle of the city.
yeah.
So you can't remove yourself completely from this world, right? I know these cathedrals were built to be monuments to, looking at the ascension, but it's also beauty in the midst of this world that we have. It's as if we have taken and swapped spirituality for soul, right? We've said, okay, we have to focus only on spirit because the soul is dirty and bad, right? That's the flesh part.
Yeah.
That's the part we have to get rid of. But if we can actually work on spirit and soul, like combine them, like, that's where I think the tree is the perfect metaphor. You look at a tree that does not get its roots into the ground, right, into the soul, into the earth, into the Gaia, right? You get those roots in there. The deeper they go, the stronger its connection to heaven, the stronger it can grow high, right? But those trees that don't sit into the soul, they don't go into the earth, they're very shallow. Well, a tiny wind will blow and knock them over, right? We see that all the time. I would argue that humans are very much the same. Like, we need to grip down deep. I think there's a lot of people who choose to go really high with, how they're attaining their relationship with God, but their roots aren't very deep. They're not either invested in the world or invested in others or invested in, creation. But again, if we believe that God created the heavens and the earth, and we're totally ignoring the earth aspect, right? This is where eco psychology comes into play too, right? And if
Yeah.
we're just going to ignore our relationship, we are made of the dust of the earth. If we're going to believe the Genesis story, then believe some of it, right? Believe that you are part of this earth. It's imbued into you with the breath of God. Suddenly we shift from having a focus solely on this spiritual connection, and then we connect with each other, right? This soulful connection with each other and with the earth. Our
Yeah.
roots can grow deep as we grow high. Like, we don't have to, it's not either or. It's not, yeah, that Cartesian dualistic, we're not, fated to be split forever. In fact, I think it's our role and responsibility to bring those things together again, to bring the spirit and to redeem the flesh the way that Christ redeemed it through sin and death, or through death on the cross and resurrection. Like, if I'm going to believe that resurrection is real, I'm going to believe it's real for all of me, not just
Right.
for me when I'm dead. It needs to be for now too.
Well, and it's interesting. I, Bind. I don't know if you read Bind Deloria Jr.'s work, but he talks about the metaphysics, the ontologies of space and time, or space and land. So it's like a lot of the Native American traditions and the Hindu traditions and a lot of the Celtic traditions, shamanic traditions, their practice, their transcendence, their vertical was always connected to
Mhm.
place. It
Sure.
had a strong connection to the land around them. It had a strong connection to the ceremonies, the rituals, where they were at. And I think with Christianity, it was one of the biggest shifts we've seen into an ontological shift to a metaphysics of time, to where it's no longer about the place; it's about what happened in a specific time in history, and it lives detached.
Yes.
Which is not. I'm not gonna demonize that and say, oh,
Right.
God can't travel, because they certainly can.
Right.
I think
Right.
they can
Yeah.
move, and they do move. But I think what we do see, and what we haven't seen, is how this version of Christianity, or Protestant evangelicalism, roots itself into the land, not just in communities of like your church building, but I mean
Right.
the rituals of the land and the
Right.
connections of the cycles of the land. And I think that is very problematic, because when you don't have those value systems based in to whatever your fundamental belief is, then you have the issues with the Anthropocene that we see. We see these environmental, ecological catastrophes that take place. So we see this total um, lack of awareness or understanding or appreciation or respect. It's very sectarianism. It's very like colonial, right? Like it's like, hey,
Yep.
like this is what you need, and we'll take it into all these
Yep.
different
We're going
places.
to conquer the world, right? We were meant to
Right.
give, we were given dominion over the land.
Right.
Well,
Yes.
okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that plays out, and and I think there's so many unconscious parts of the faith that live in the shadow, which is something I always want to ask you, because I think that is one of, and Hillman said this, he when he was talking about psychology, he said psychology and Christianity, one of the biggest downfalls is both are refusing to acknowledge the shadow.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, is like, what are the hidden costs, both the psychological, the religious, uh, to these to not acknowledging that shadow? When you think of that, what does that make you like? What would you say to that?
It's a really good question because, we struggle with the shadow. Yeah. I struggle with, Jung's idea that, in Answers to Job, we look at Answers to Job, and Jung had a big commentary on that, and how God has to have some sort of shadow side to him, right? That we do not deal well with, in where God is infallible, because we see the shadow is infallible, but it's not about right or wrong, right? I think we see the shadow as wrong, somehow
Yeah.
it's bad, and it's not. It's just
Yeah.
another aspect of ourself that we have not embraced. I think if we learn to work with it rather than against it, or burying it or shoving it away, if we learn to work with it and make it more conscious, that's when you actually get to a point where the shadow and the shadow and the self can grow together. Like, we learn to be together as one. Like, to me, that's that unity point. It's not like I'm trying to reduce my shadow to non-existence. I need to know that I have a shadow. My shadow helps me know that I'm a three-dimensional living being. I have depth, and there's mass to me. Um, I need to look at that shadow, but not ignore it, and not say it doesn't exist. No, it does exist, but I need to be conscious of it. I think we in Christianity need to do that as well. And oh my God, there's so much shadow coming out all over the place, right? With how, especially with Christian nationalism, the way that we are treating the other, right? Anytime we talk about treating the other, I think that's when anytime we've got an other in the story, that's where we've got that split of the tree, right? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Before that, it was just the tree of life. Like, can we get back to that? I want to get back to that. So, yeah, to me, I think this is a journey I'm still on, but I am recognizing that, that shadow within me. I used to fight that shadow. Now I get curious about the shadow. What is that shadow? What is the thing that I don't like about myself? What is the thing that I'm repressing or shoving down? What, even in my Christian walk, right? What is it that is craving within me, that is not being satiated by with the mystery of God? What is it? And when I start to get curious about those shadow moments, it uncovers so much more that I can then invite God into, and to become, a healing salve for those wounds that I've had that have created this shadow environment of me. But I'm never going to get rid of that shadow. It's still going to be there, but now it's just it doesn't control me. Now I'm
Yeah.
using it in a harmonious way, right? Now it's like looking at the world and saying, okay, yeah, maybe this world is not my home, but while I'm here, I'm going to I'm going to help it. I'm going to be kind to it, right? Let's be nice to the environment, the people that are around us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about this too with the sense of the idea of even just salvation, right? Like the
Mhm.
how salvation's taught of this salvific prayer, and once you pray, there's this indwelling that happens. Like it's like this event, right? Like it's it wasn't there, now it is there, and then now it's like, oh wow, what a big day.
Yeah.
And that's not to to belittle moments of transformation or like aporic moments where you encounter this numinous thing that's like, wow, this is beyond. And we all have
Right.
that. And I think that's I mean, I've had that personally, and that's been very transformational, alchemical, whatever
Yeah.
you call it. But I think where it gets a little nefarious is when that becomes like your bus ticket in,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, the soul, like we've locked your soul into eternity. Like, good job. Now just hold on.
Right.
You know, Paul used the word sozo, right? And I've always loved that word because it means saved, healed, delivered. But the way that it was used was an ongoing process.
Right.
So a person is continually being sozoed. And as you go through life, you realize that this monolithic self that we have, or this idea that we're this one person that has to get saved, you start realizing you're like, I'm a I'm a lot of different things.
Right.
There's a lot of different forces and energies that's moving through me, um, that are at different levels of awareness, that have different experiences and that have different types of energies attached to them and different burdens, as IFS
Right.
would talk about. And I think that to me is such an interesting part of acknowledging the shadow, is acknowledging that throughout this process, there is a resurrection that happens continually. Um, and I find that from my perspective, I notice that sometimes can be accepted within certain categories or frameworks of allowance, right? Where it's like if you are a Christian and you're struggling with lust, they have space for that, where it's like, well,
Right.
like that's something that you're gonna struggle with, and that's something that you're gonna be dealing with, and we'll work through it. But if you're a Christian and you struggle with this idea of belief or faith, or this idea of like, I'm not sure, it's like, well, now we're getting a little bit, oh, well, wait a minute, that's not, don't you think about this, or just things that you might not feel comfortable, like you couldn't tell people in a group, and so now that gets suppressed in a place where I can't be my authentic self. And I do think that there is a huge shadow suppression that happens with this belief that we must get saved, and then once we're saved, we're good, because I think it creates this false notion that um that life is not an ongoing process of emergence of all sorts of different types of energies and beings and awarenesses and and
Yeah.
whatnot. And I think that can that can really, and again, I go back, I think it's, to me, it's more of a lack of language. I
Yeah.
think that like it doesn't necessarily like, I've yet to see a thought or an idea that is as problematic to a genuine connection with Christ that fundamentalists have made it out to be. And when I say that, I mean like the things that we're afraid of, or we're fearful, or we don't want to entertain or um, talk about. I'm not sure that it, like once you push past it, it's like I think you still see that, oh, there's still an opportunity to. I still have that connection. Is basically what I'm trying to say. Like even
Yeah.
for me, and I would say like talking to you, I feel it as well. It's like you let go of all this stuff and you're like, oh, at the end of the day, like I still feel connected to Christ. Like I'm not, like whatever I was afraid of, you come through the other side and you're like, oh, there is a world here.
Yeah. And it's a little more free now, right?
Yeah.
Because that fear is bondage. I really do believe when fear hits us, it should not be it shouldn't only be a warning. I think it should be a flag to say, hey, just have some question this a little bit. Find out what it is that you're afraid of. Because honestly, a lot of it may come down to we're just not we're afraid that we're going to lose control, or that God will abandon us, right? And those are some deep issues that we don't like to unpack, right? And you don't usually unpack those on
Well,
Sunday
that's the
morning.
shadow. I
Yeah,
think there's shadow there because there's something there that you're not able to actually, I talked to a lady one time. It's like, even with IFS, which internal family systems, like Dick Schwartz, and it's basically, he has a book, No Bad Parts. So it's essentially like we're a multiplicity of autonomous parts that have patterns that have collected from past traumas or experiences.
very
And you might
polytheistic,
very
right? Very
poly
polytheistic.
100%. And so then the ego kind of thinks about this, but then when you want to practice it, you go into an imaginal state where you
Right,
then invite these parts to speak, and people will have visions and they'll hear. And it happens every time this is part of my work. I work with people, and it's like, it never fails. Like, something
yeah,
will come up and they'll have a part, and they'll start talking to it, and they realize it's like, oh, this part that they thought was bad
right,
or sinful or whatever, oftentimes just misunderstood or just reacting,
yeah,
and I think that those things have been so suppressed in that community because it's like you're taught to reject sin, push sin
right,
away, stop doing sin. But you realize that these parts are not doing sin. They're not.
right.
They're operating on the pattern that they are holding. And so, and you said something beautiful that is the core of IFS. It's like curiosity is the number one way of engaging. And so, what that would, I think, practically look like is if somebody's has a habit or a thought or a, a area of their life that is seems to be out of their control, kind of overwhelming. Um, I think a lot of times Christianity would say, okay, well, that's a thing that you need to give to Jesus, or you need to pray about it, or whatever. Um, Being more specific with what that is and asking those questions as to where it started, where it came from, what is it trying to express, like all of that.
Yeah,
And I've seen, I've seen people in the Christian world do IFS, um, and I think it does transfer, but I think sometimes we can do it disservice when I heard one lady say, it's like, oh, well, Jesus is this part was a a sinful boulder or something, and then Jesus was this, and I was like, yeah, but that's still a it's not just a sinful boulder. Like, that's a beautiful part of you
right,
that
right,
has something to offer, something to give, and it's more or less misunderstood than it is
right.
sinful. Like,
Yeah. And when we have that mentality, though, we run away from it rather than investigating it, right? We say, oh, that's a boulder and Jesus is going to take care of it, all magical, right? But it's still going to be a boulder. And he's inviting you into the process of transforming that boulder, right? Breaking that boulder down, finding out why it's a boulder, how it got there in the first place. I would say Jesus in those instances is desperately wanting to be an archaeologist with you, right? Let's unpack this and find out what's inside this giant rock, this boulder that's been in a massive part of your life for so long, right?
yeah,
That's the thing that I think inviting Christ or inviting the God into those moments, even in therapy, and to sit with the uncomfortableness of God is going to see your junk and help you unpack it. Like we trust a lot of humans to do that. That's what we do in therapy. But to invite God into those moments too can be really transformative because suddenly God is not going to be the God that's going to reject you because of it, right? No matter how many times people have said this, bring all your stuff to God, right? Bring all your sin to God and God will take care of it. But we feel really embarrassed and really shameful, right? And that's the first thing that happened in the garden, right? Adam and Eve, they eat the thing and then suddenly there's shame. Well, that shame is that understanding of that. Oh, okay, now I see good and evil as two different things. I do want to bring it back a little bit because we did talk about this idea of sin and sin being, it's missing the mark, right? We've been told it's missing the mark, but I think we can it's like saying, if I've got a coin and heads and tails, and I spin the coin and I say, okay, hit it with an arrow. Well, you're going to miss the mark half of the time, right? Because it's one side of the other, but you're always going to hit the coin. The coin is the same no matter which side of the face you're aiming at. Does that make sense?
hmm
So with this idea of, well, that's a shameful part of myself. unpack it. There's something there. If we trust that God is a God who redeems all things, who brought everything into existence for the good of those who love him, right? Which we often may exclude ourselves from, but we shouldn't. We can bring ourselves into that. If all of these things are working together, what is this boulder, as you were saying, what does this boulder have to teach me about who I am in Christ? Who am I with
Yeah.
this boulder, and why is it here? And what is it going to, how is it going to get redeemed? Right? If we start to see our shadow as less of a flaw in ourselves, but as a strength of how God is going to use it and transform it to bring about some sort of healing for the nations, for ourselves, for our families, whatever it is, like that's empowering, right? That's
Yeah.
exciting. That makes me want to look at the junk in my past and say, okay, let's unpack it so I can see how it's being redeemed now, and
Yeah.
how what happened to me when I was 4 is going to transform someone else's life when I'm 60, because of
Yeah.
what I say or what I do. Like, yeah, I like that
Well,
idea of God. I
yeah.
like God being that big.
Well, and you realize it's like you mentioned the word alchemical, which means transformation, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just another way of saying transformation. I I feel very similar when think about areas that and a- and I want to shift it away from sin because I think sin is like it's maybe a little too loaded, right?
Mhm.
I think another way of saying this, especially within shadow, would be areas of disproportional in engagement or involvement or energetic. Like somebody says something that it really wasn't a big thing, but for whatever reason, it just like gets you going. Like you just
Yeah.
there's something that's like, and or you somebody says it and you can't stop thinking about it, or you
Mhm.
can't. It just the anxiety, rumination, like all of these things that start to spiral into it of areas that logically you're like, well, there's no real reason. I think people say that all the time. It's like I know this shouldn't bother me so much, but it does, or there's something there.
Mhm.
And I think you're right. It's all breadcrumbs. It's all clues. It's all information
Yeah.
as to what areas are being taken up in the psyche or being contaminated. Or if you think about if the psyche is a radio, right, or a receiver, if there's information coming, those types of things kind of show the static and the friction. But
Right.
I think what's really interesting about that is, from my own personal life, I don't know about you, but whenever I explore those things, or whenever I do get curious about them, or whenever I do take that as something as like, oh, this is actually potentials or energy of, you think about it in polarity,
Yeah.
that is like an exponential force that that for my own creative abilities, for my own freedom, for my own power, that is a deeper connection, right? Like it's
Mhm.
like I think of it as like the ability to let the divine flow through me, and that's oftentimes blocked by these other types of forces, these other energies. And so when you do
Yeah.
see it, if we're aware of it, like Gershiff talks a lot about this. It's like most people are asleep. We just react. We're always reacting, but becoming aware of those moments where you're like, something felt like, what did like?
What
It
was that?
sometimes that's enough to wake us up,
Yeah.
and that becomes a portal, right? It's like the pain, the sin, like the challenges we face are oftentimes it's like, oh, that's our portal to actually seeing God.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you this because this is what I think about when I think about this conversation. See, the real challenge a lot of times is not so much understanding things conceptually, because I think the ego does a really good job of like allowing a person to intellectually perceive these concepts, the idea of God, the idea of sin, the idea of anything we're talking about. Like it's going to frame it and then put it into a context or put it into a relationship in which you understand that's connected to the context of your life. What I find and what Jung, I think this was like his whole thing, that connection to the unconscious and the totality of the psyche, which is oftentimes not what the ego thinks or wants to hear or is expecting. gives us a perspective and an ability to actually see the shadow, to see the burdens, to see the things that our ego is not going to want to let us see. And so what I find is like there there oftentimes needs to be a way in which a person can receive information from the unconscious in a transformative way. If there's going to be a true alchemical, a true resurrection, a true like death to the ego. And last thing I'll say is like I was talking to a friend one time and it just kind of hit me. It's like most people will die, a Christian or evangelical. It's like, oh, I'll die to my sins or I'll die to myself. I'll die to all the things. And my question is like, have you died to your belief in God? Like truly, and I know that sounds
Right.
blasphemous, but no, like, have you died to that? Like, have you died to
Right.
the no, like, because essentially, what is that? That's death of ego, right? Like,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the last thing that we hold on to sometimes is that death. And so, yeah, maybe you can. I said a lot, but maybe what does that bring up for you?
Mm. So much. Well, I mean, that idea of death of ego is so beautiful because we do understand, or when we break it down, our ego ends up being God a lot of the time, right? I mean, we equate ego and self too closely, and that might even be lowercase s self, right?
Yeah,
We just see ourselves as the center of the universe. This is actually this is I really do believe that curiosity and empathy are the two things we need to save humanity. Just those two things alone. So getting curious about our fears, about our pains, or anything else, and then stepping into empathy, like removing yourself from the center of the universe, is a game changer, right? Especially for evangelicals. Um, we're really good at making things about ourselves, right? And we're going to be the saviors of humanity. We're still at the center of the universe, right? Um, Empathy is such a beautiful way of putting other people's stories before your own story, right? You recognize their story. Empathy invites you into someone else's lived experience. And it doesn't mean you have to agree with that lived experience, but you have to at least admit their lived experience is valid. It has been validated because they've experienced it, right? I don't have to agree with it, but I do have to recognize that it's a thing. And I find that if more of us stepped into empathy with each other, with other, not just the people that we go to the same church with, but people like our neighbor, right, who doesn't go to the same church as me, who doesn't have the same belief systems. Instead of me putting myself at the center of that world, what if I put them at the center of the world?
right.
How would that change the way that I show up in their life? How would I change? It would be huge, right? My oftentimes the way that I'm behaving and the things that I choose to do are because I am at the center of all of it. The minute I put someone else at the center, everything shifts, right? So that idea of empathy, I think, really can, even in this climate that we have, right? This climate of, especially with, Christian nationalism, evangelical nationalism, and this whole idea of othering other people. The minute that I've got an other in a sentence, if I'm not flipping that story and putting myself in their perspective, my God, what am I doing? I need to be doing that. Oftentimes we love to, in Christian circles, we're like, oh, the story of the Good Samaritan, and who are we and who is Christ? And we're always like, we're the good guys. Well, we're not really the good guys sometimes, right? Sometimes we are the rabbi and the priest that go on the other side of the road because we don't want to get our hands dirty with the other, right?
Yeah,
So let's try and be the other for a little while, and suddenly again you have that split that we've had for so long, me versus you, and now it's us together, right? Suddenly we go from being the good and evil split, that Cartesian split, the dualism becomes unity, and I've not lost me and you've not lost you, but now we are operating together as a whole, and to me that's so beautiful, and it removes fear and it keeps curiosity and empathy at the core. It's at the core.
yeah. No, it's beautiful. I had I'm in a couple of different Jungian dream dream
Yeah.
groups, and I love those groups so much. And there's something really powerful about a group of people coming together, bringing their dreams and looking at them through a symbolic inflection of or symbolic analysis, and realizing that in many times it's not what the ego, like once you start looking at it with a group of people that are loving, that are open-minded, that are there and connected in that same spirit, you get this freedom of exploration that is like, wow, like I've never like here. This is a part of you that's expressing this or that. This, I never like my ego wasn't going to let me see that, and now I have this another perspective on it, and there's this flexibility to it. There's this growth packed in there. This ability to, like what you were saying, it's almost like you're not putting your ego at the center, and you're not putting someone else's ego at the center. You're all kind of looking at a thing together. And I think that, and I remember being a part of many church groups growing up. And I don't think I ever felt that sense of freedom to explore the raw, like, content of what my ego is thinking about, but then what my unconscious is like metabolizing.
Yeah.
And I would, and I'm curious what you'd say, but like, I think that's a big issue we're having right now is people become so disconnected from the unconscious, from the rest of the psyche. They're disconnected from themselves in a way that they don't actually know the content that they're carrying around.
Right.
They
You're right.
they have the story that they've related to, that they're functioning with, and then whatever the whatever the unconscious is actually holding on to then starts to get projected out, and there's no space.
Right.
There's no space for someone to uncover that
Something
content
new. Right. New revelation. Yeah.
in a space, in a non-judgmental space, and
Right.
in a way where it's like, we can explore these things, and I genuinely feel in these groups that I'm in, it's like I could be whatever, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I see this swing on the other side where people leave the church. I don't know if you had a period of your life where you ever, when you walked, if you ever walked away or if you stayed, but I see a lot of people, they go through a moment where they let go of all the suppression and the hurt and the pain of like being in or even just the fabrications of stuff. And they kind of develop this jadedness about it where it's like, I can't participate in anything like that because, it's naive or superstitious, or there's something to it that's not useful or whatever. And I understand everybody's got different reasons for why they do what they do, but I'm always asking myself when I'm talking to somebody that's I find this a lot with people that are really into Hillman, because I felt like Hillman was a little like this, where it was like you can critique Christianity and find the good places where it does need to be critiqued. And then I think you go into this area where it's just like there's maybe a projection or a complex that you're also just angry about or just upset about or just frustrated with. And that gets projected out. And so it's like, to me, I'm wondering, where can we find these spaces in which it's no longer a, a battle against like, oh, well, you're dumb for believing this, or oh, you believe this, or you're causing these problems. Like, where people are truly just like, hey, I'm okay with my relationship with Christ being this. And what, I don't know what I would even call that. Like, maybe it's not what you would call it. I'm not denying it, but I'm also wouldn't classify myself as a Christian. So, being able to show up in the world with the nuance and the complexity, I think to me, there's not a lot of spaces for that.
Right. Yeah, there aren't. There's not. It's hard, right? It's hard. I mean, because that kind of smacks against corporate Christianity, right? Because everything is a little more cookie cutter. It's a little bit, you've got a brand, you've got an identity, especially the larger the churches get, you have a brand that you have to maintain, right? There is a whole underworking where this does not become the story of Christ necessarily. It becomes corporate. Um, Now, I will say I do have a men's group that I meet with, and we do a Lectio devotion on Friday mornings at 6 a.m.
Mm,
6:30. I'm up every 6:30 in the Friday morning, and I'm unpacking scripture, and I'm doing close readings of scripture, which I never get to do, right? But I'm with a group of guys who some of them do not follow where I'm going, like cuz but they give me the space to go down these massive rabbit holes and getting stuck on one word and how this word is used in so many different ways and what the ways that this one word could help you understand the scripture in a new way, right? I'm
yeah,
looking for fresh fire from all of this. Um I I get that every week, and it is life-giving, right? Because it
yeah,
allows me to question what I've always been taught, right? We need that opportunity to unpack our old baggage, and say, "Yeah, this serves me," or "No, it doesn't serve me anymore," or the understanding I have that now feeds my life, right? This is what I had before, but I need this now, right? And we have the ability to unpack that part of Scripture. It doesn't happen often because from Sunday to Sunday, you don't get that unless you're doing life together. You're just showing up to put on the Sunday Christian motif. You're putting on that persona, right? Um, you mentioned complexes, Jung's complexes, and I think that the church is riddled with them, right? And this is how you get a lot of people going off, right? Anytime a complex is constellated, you get that eruption. Sometimes it happens internally inside of us, or sometimes it happens from the pulpit, right? The pastor up front is really going through it, and you hear it based on whatever he's spewing out. That idea of the complex and being able to unpack it and unwind it, and to really get down to understanding what is that core archetypal uh, nucleus, what's at the center of that complex. That is an invitation to step deeper into a connection with the divine, right? I mean, if we're looking at the archetypes as these patterns that represent human existence in some way, shape, or form, then tapping into it or understanding it or unpacking it is going to get you closer to God, to the divine, to whatever that looks like in sometimes a scary way. But we don't get that opportunity often in church, right? It requires outside of church time. It requires outside of that corporate time, and rarely do we get to find groups that are religious focused, right? You can do it with a dream group because a dream group is not there for salvation purposes. They're there
yeah,
for understanding and self unpacking, right?
yeah,
But with church, we tend to be more towards salvation. And what does Jesus have to say for us today? Well, it might be more than just that surface, what Jesus has to say. There's something he's got to say to the core wounding within you. Inviting him into that takes a lot of transparency, a lot of vulnerability that we often don't have time for
yeah.
in our modern worship now.
Yeah, and I know we're running close to in on time here, but I think there's so much to unpack with just I think that influences a lot of the work that I am looking at that I do as far as kind of the reinfusion of language, like symbolic and imaginal language. Because what I see within these frameworks that you're talking about is this idea that I think you're giving a very prescriptive model. It's a thick prescription of an ontology of like here's how it all works. Let's morph ourselves into this interpretation. Um, and there's a very thin layer of like practice or ecologies of how to practice, where I think it's like that almost needs to be reversed, right? We need a thin prescriptive ontology of like here's the definitions of everything, and we need a wider more expansive immersion of practices and
Yeah.
ways of embodying and engaging, because what I've noticed throughout my own personal journey is that I started within a Christian framework where I was giving labels and an understanding that was, I mean, within that framework there was all sorts of information, but it was still a very narrow view as to like all of the things happening around it, and that's the connection with ecology, cognitive science,
Yeah.
um, other mystical traditions. Like, I mean, there's so many things that I think as a kid you're taught. It's like, oh, that's just that's not important.
Right.
There's one thing that's important, and you're given like very like very vague labels of angels and demons and this and
Right.
that, and you're like,
Yeah.
this might be a thing. And then as you begin to become curious and travel or study and go deeper, you realize that like, oh, this is nuanced and complex, and there is a porousness to the human experience, and then there's also a mysterious veil over a lot of things uh, that that is resistant, like to that propositional obtainment of knowing it, right? And it won't fit in the ego. It won't fit in the intellect. It's bigger than that. And I think that's where I think it's, well, from this conversation, it's like accepting that that circle is always going to be trying to expand, and the harder we try to constrict it, the more problems that we're going to run into.
Yeah, for sure. Definite problems, because that's how we butt up against our own paradigms, right? And that's where we get that cognitive dissonance, and I can't handle it. It's got to be one or the other. Well, sometimes both can be the same. They both can be equally valid, right? I think
Yeah.
the more we move into that state of being able to hold that tension, that the work of Christianity is to change the world and to change ourselves, right? There's more than just one direction. It is multi-directional, omnidirectional, right? Yeah, so many ways to go.
Yeah. No, I love that. Well, Dr. Drew, thank you so much for spending time with me today, man. I really
As
enjoyed this.
always.
Well, we might have to do a part two. We'll have to.
I would love it. I love talking to you about this stuff. It's fantastic. We have a common language. It's not often that you find people that are in this section of psychology that are still within, their faith stance as well. Often I see people dropping one for the other, but it's good to be able to balance them both, because I think it creates such a wealth of room to play. Like, we just
Yeah.
get to play. That's what I get to do now. I'm playing now. Before,
Yeah.
religion and spirituality was not play. Now it's play, and it's way more fun, and it's a lot more exciting. Um,
Well, and it's funny too, and I think I've reached a point where although I don't identify, uh, it's hard to identify as a Christian because I feel like there's so much that could mean so many things to
yeah.
so many
Yep.
people. That is a challenge. That is still a part where I'm like, I don't want to mislead anybody, but I will say, like, as I've journeyed to different types of spiritual practices and different sadhanas and whatnot, I realized that there's a reality in so much of my psyche, so much of my experience in life has that Christ-centered embodiment already connected there. And so
Right.
it's like it does me no good to try to identify as this or that, because at the end of the day, it's like it's already done. Like I've already been molded in a certain way. I've already
Right.
been relationally attached to certain events, and I've seen things, and I'm like, I can't explain that. So it's like it is what it is. So as opposed to trying to grab it and hold it and wrestle it down, it's like I will let it live as it lives and worry, and other people's projections can be whatever their projections are. And I don't need to, I don't need to, I don't need to worry about that,
Yeah.
and let that be. And I think that's where, for me, the non-sectarian view of like, and I think so many other religions and um, practices, especially within the Hindu and the Buddhist traditions, hold this very well. And, understanding is like, look, God is so big, and we're seeing we're seeing these portals, these representations, these great figures that are showing us things that are very unique and dynamic and um, life giving, and there's so much to learn from them. To reject any of that, especially to reject something that has naturally presented itself to you, or that is in what Hillman would call the tree, right? Like is on your tree, right?
Yep.
Um, you're working against yourself, I think.
Right. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, like you're not getting to play, the
Right.
Leela of divine play. And so that's why I really wanted to have this conversation, because I was like, I really enjoy having the richness and the textures of being able to sit in a space and push past that urge. Because I know a lot of people that will listen to this will either be on the side of like, maybe they are evangelical and they're like, this is just, and that might um brush up against some things. And then there might be some people that they're very against Christianity because they've been hurt by some certain things,
Yeah.
or they hear the word Christ and
Yeah.
it's like, it's okay for them to sit with this too, because it's like, those are areas like, why, and like, and I think being able to like put that out is powerful. It is the self, it is the authentic.
Yeah.
So it is, yeah.
Yeah. And I want more authenticity, right? The world is so full of fake and phony. Like I don't have time for that. No one's got time for that anymore. Like let's just be
Yeah.
authentic with each other, even if that's in a church building where, the end of Sunday happens and we have to come back a week later and pick back the conversation up, right? Like it's okay to not be comfortable all the time. I'm recognizing, and the comfort with even the label. I hate labels. I really do. I think labels divide us more than they unite us. But if I had to pick a label, I as well, like, I don't want to say that I'm a Christian because it has so many different connotations, right? You've got to have a qualifier in there. So I'm now seeing myself as just a mystic. I'm a mystic
Yeah.
because I like the mystery. The mystery is where I can sit and I find comfort in the uncertainty of it all.
Yeah.
There's a level of comfort I have with that uncertainty, that I don't know it all. I don't have all the answers, and I'm not about to say someone else doesn't have the answers too, just because it looks different to me. You know what I mean? Like sitting in that mysticism is a really uncomfortable but very anticipatory state. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
It feels alive.
Awesome.
Good.
Well, Dr. Drew, thank you so much. And we'll look forward to next time.
Thank you, sir. As always, pleasure to talk to
Yeah.
you.
Guys, before you go, if I could ask you one quick favor. If you enjoyed this video and you got something from it, I would sincerely appreciate it if you would like and maybe subscribe to the channel. Every bit of engagement helps. And in the meantime, if you're curious to check out more content like this, maybe check out this video or that video. Yeah, that's a good one. And don't forget to subscribe.